broke, lost everything. No one believed in him. But Ricardo didn't give up. He turned it all around. And today, his story is pure inspiration. Welcome, my friends, to the EU So Prospero channel. Maybe right now you feel lost. Maybe that dream of becoming a millionaire, the one you were born with, feels buried under years of obstacles, failures, and pain. But I'm here to tell you, don't give up. You were born to be a millionaire, and you will become one. It is absolutely possible to turn your life around. Today, you're going to witness Ricardo's full journey, the path of someone who rose from rock bottom to financial freedom. Maybe you've already thought it's over for you. But let me remind you, it's not over. Just like Ricardo and so many others who rebuilt their lives, you will rise again. And soon, your name will be a story of victory too. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel EU So Prospero, smash the like button, and leave a comment if this video inspires you in any way. Let's begin. A 5-second message. Are you in debt? Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind. At 30, Ricardo's reflection in the mirror was a stark contrast to the young man who once dreamed of conquering the world. The image staring back at him was that of a man broken, worn down by years of poor decisions, failed investments, and the overwhelming weight of debt. He could feel the strain in his body, the result of countless sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, loans, and the future. Each day was like walking through a fog of despair. He could no longer remember what it felt like to have hope, to believe that success was within his reach. All he could see was the debt, stacked up like mountains that seemed impossible to climb. He had no idea where his life had gone wrong or how he had ended up here. Credit cards were maxed out. Loans from every bank and payday lender had piled up, and the interest rates were bleeding him dry. He was constantly dodging calls from creditors, pretending he was somewhere he wasn't, just to avoid the shame of admitting he had failed. The weight of those monthly payments crushed him like a vice. He couldn't keep up with the demands, couldn't face the reality of how far he had fallen. It wasn't just the financial burden. It was the emotional one too. His family, once proud of his potential, was now disappointed in him. His parents had always believed in him, had seen him as the one who would break the mold, who would escape the ordinary and make something extraordinary of himself. But now they didn't know what to say. Their glances were filled with pity, frustration, and the unsaid words that lingered in the air. The guilt ate away at him, reminding him constantly that he had let them down. Friends, once close, had drifted away. Some avoided him, unsure how to handle the tension of his constant failures, while others simply stopped calling, stopped inviting him to gatherings. They had their own lives, their own successes, and it hurt too much to be reminded of everything he had lost. The social isolation became another heavy weight on his shoulders. He couldn't help but wonder if they had ever truly believed in him, or if his failure was just too much for them to bear. And dreams, his dreams, felt like distant memories, locked away in a place he couldn't access. What happened to the fire in his eyes? What happened to the ambition, the desire to build something bigger than himself? It all felt like it had vanished into thin air, replaced by a suffocating sense of defeat. Each day felt like a fight just to get out of bed and face the world, and it was becoming harder and harder to find a reason to keep going. Ricardo felt like a man who had been stripped of everything: hope, ambition, friends, family, and even his own identity. He didn't know how to fix things, didn't know where to start. Every step forward seemed to push him 2 steps back. The weight of it all was unbearable. He was tired, exhausted, drained, of everything. But there was something, deep inside, that refused to let him quit. Even though he couldn't see the way out, there was a quiet voice, hidden beneath all the noise of his despair, that whispered, "This isn't the end. You haven't lost everything. You can rebuild. You can rise again." Ricardo didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't stay in this place forever. Even though it seemed like a dream that was no longer his, deep down, a spark remained. It was fragile, but it was still there. and that spark would become the ember that would ignite the fire of his transformation in the years to come. The road ahead would be long, and the journey would be painful, but Ricardo was about to embark on the most incredible transformation of his life. This story isn't just about one man's struggle. It's about anyone who has ever felt like they've hit rock bottom. It's about finding the strength to rise, the courage to keep going, and the wisdom to know that even when all seems lost, the journey back to greatness begins with the smallest step forward. The story of Ricardo's rebirth is the story of countless others. Those who have fallen, those who have failed, and those who refuse to give up. Stay with me. What happened next will change everything.
A 5-second message. Are you in debt?
Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind. Ricardo sat alone on the park bench, the weight of the world pressing down on him.
The warm sun that had once been comforting now felt oppressive, as if it too were aware of his defeat.
The collection notice in his hand seemed to mock him, its harsh red lettering a reminder of the crushing reality that had become his life.
The fine print blurred before his eyes, but the meaning was clear. He was at rock bottom.
There was no way out, no way forward. Every attempt he had made to escape his financial ruin had ended in failure. His dreams were now just hollow echoes of what once was. How had he gotten here? How had everything gone so terribly wrong? For a moment, he allowed himself to sink into the despair that seemed to wrap itself around him like a suffocating fog.
He had tried and tried again to find a way out of this mess.
Yet each time, the door had slammed shut in his face, each failure stacking on top of the last, creating an insurmountable mountain.
The voices in his head were relentless. Voices that told him he was weak, that he wasn't capable of change, that he didn't deserve a second chance.
The shame of his financial mistakes hung over him like a cloud, following him wherever he went. His heart ached with the knowledge that he had let down everyone who had ever believed in him, including himself. What was left for him? Was this how his story would end? A man whose potential had once been limitless, now reduced to someone who couldn't even pay off a simple debt? He could feel the tears welling up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. There was no room for tears anymore, no space for weakness. He had already lost so much. What difference would one more defeat make? Just as he began to believe that the weight of his circumstances was too much to bear, something unexpected happened. It was subtle at first, a small shift, a quiet interruption to his drowning thoughts. A man approached the park bench and sat down beside him. Ricardo barely noticed at first. The stranger didn't speak. He simply sat there, quietly observing the world around him. Ricardo was so immersed in his own misery that he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge the presence of the man beside him. The stranger didn't seem to mind. And then, without warning, the man spoke.
His voice was calm, measured, as if he had all the time in the world.
"You know," the man said, "this isn't the end of your story. Not unless you choose for it to be." Ricardo looked up, startled. He had been so lost in his own thoughts that the man's words seemed to cut through the fog of despair that had clouded his mind. The stranger was older, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, with graying hair and a face that carried the weight of experience. His eyes, however, were filled with a warmth and understanding that took Ricardo by surprise. "You don't know me," Ricardo muttered, feeling the bitterness rise in his chest. "You don't know anything about what I've been through." The man nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need to know everything. I've been through my own struggles, too. The point is, I'm still here, and I'm not giving up. You don't have to either." Ricardo was silent for a long time, the words sinking in. He wasn't used to hearing anyone speak with such certainty. In fact, he hadn't heard a word of encouragement in so long that it felt foreign to him. His mind raced as he processed the man's words, wondering what it would mean to stop seeing himself as a failure, as someone who was defined by his mistakes. He felt the sting of pride, the voice inside telling him that he couldn't accept help, that he needed to handle this on his own. But that voice was growing quieter now. The man, sensing the internal struggle, spoke again. "You don't need to have all the answers right now. But you do need to stop defining yourself by where you are. Who you are today is not who you were meant to be. You have a choice in how your story ends. You can keep believing the lies that say it's over, or you can take one small step forward. Ricardo's chest tightened as the man's words reverberated within him. He had always believed that success was something that just happened, that it was a destination that you reached, rather than a process that required constant effort, growth, and transformation. He had thought that once he reached the lowest point, there would be no way back. But now, the idea that his story wasn't over, that it could still unfold in a different way, began to take root inside of him. The stranger stood up to leave, but before he walked away, he offered one final piece of advice. Start with just one small change. It might seem insignificant, but trust me, it's the first step that matters. And just like that, the man was gone. Ricardo sat there, stunned, his mind buzzing with the unexpected encounter. He had been so consumed by his failures, by the weight of his mistakes, that he hadn't realized how much he had been shutting out the possibility of change. The idea of transformation, of starting anew, felt like a distant dream. But now, for the first time in a long while, it felt possible. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the trees, Ricardo stood up slowly, his hand still gripping the collection notice, but something had shifted within him. He didn't know how or when, but he had a new sense of resolve. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt like there might be a way out. The lowest point wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something he had yet to understand. And that was the first step toward rebuilding. Ricardo's fingers brushed against the worn leather cover, its edges frayed from years of neglect. Dust clung stubbornly to its surface, as if the book had been waiting there, unnoticed, forgotten by the world. He picked it up with hesitant hands, feeling the surprising weight of it, heavier than it looked, as if it carried not just pages, but burdens, secrets, maybe even answers. His eyes squinted against the afternoon light as he read the faded title, The Wealth Within, Unlocking Prosperity Through Mind and Spirit. The words seemed almost laughable, like a cruel joke played by the universe at his expense. He let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. Positive thinking, mindset of wealth? In his reality, wealth was numbers he couldn't reach, zeros he could never add to his name. He muttered under his breath, how can positive thoughts pay off crushing debts? How does imagining abundance erase empty bank accounts? His voice carried a jagged edge, sharpened by years of disappointment. Still, something made him hold on to it. There was something haunting about the book, as if it wasn't just abandoned, but deliberately left behind for someone like him. A relic from a forgotten traveler who perhaps had once stood at a similar crossroads. Ricardo thought about tossing it into the nearest trash can, but he paused. Maybe, he thought grimly, this book was as lost as he was. Maybe, together, they'd figure something out. Flipping through the first few pages, he found handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. Sentences like, what you believe, you become, and focus on abundance, not scarcity, were underlined with fervor. The previous owner had even starred entire paragraphs, leaving arrows and exclamation points as if urgently trying to grab Ricardo's attention across time. These scribbles gave the book a strange, living energy, like it wasn't merely ink on paper but a conversation, a desperate one, between generations of the broken and the hopeful. Skepticism warred with desperation inside him. His rational mind screamed that this was nonsense, that thinking differently wouldn't change bank balances, wouldn't mend broken relationships, wouldn't resurrect lost opportunities. Yet, buried underneath that cynical surface, something stirred. A small, exhausted voice whispered, "You've tried everything else. What do you have to lose?" Ricardo tucked the book under his arm and started walking home, the worn binding pressed tightly against his side. Each step he took seemed heavier than the last, not because of the physical weight, but because of what the book represented. The terrifying idea that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't the world conspiring against him. Maybe the real battlefield was inside his own mind. That night, long after the city lights dimmed and silence blanketed the world, Ricardo sat alone at the cracked kitchen table, the mysterious book opened before him. He read about the power of thoughts shaping reality, about how energy flowed toward focus, about wealth as a state of mind long before it became a number in an account. Words like vibration, frequency, and alignment danced in front of him. They sounded fantastical, foreign, like a language from another dimension where life worked differently. Every fiber of his being wanted to reject it, to scoff and say, "This is fantasy.
This is not how the real world works.
Yet the relentless logic of his failures silenced that skepticism. His way hadn't worked. His anger hadn't worked. His resignation hadn't worked. Page after page, he read about people who had once stood where he was, defeated, broken, hopeless, and who had clawed their way back not by external force, but by reshaping the way they thought, the way they perceived themselves and their possibilities. It wasn't just empty optimism. It was a method, a discipline, a way of seeing life differently, of training the mind to expect opportunities instead of obstacles. Ricardo didn't suddenly transform that night. No lightning bolt of revelation struck him. But something more subtle, perhaps even more powerful, began. A willingness to suspend disbelief, even just a little. A decision to give this strange philosophy a chance, because clinging to what he already knew only promised more of what he already had. Nothing. He closed the book slowly, resting his hand on its battered cover. His apartment was still cold. The debts were still there. The loneliness hadn't evaporated. But something inside him shifted, infinitesimally, like the first crack in a frozen river, almost invisible yet inevitable. He had discovered a strange kind of hope, buried inside an old, forgotten book.
Not the loud, naive hope of youth, but a quieter, grittier version. One tempered by pain, one that whispered, "Maybe there's another way."
And for Ricardo, that whisper was enough to start a revolution. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, when the city was still cloaked in shadow and the streets echoed only with a hum of distant traffic, Ricardo made his first, trembling attempt at change. There was no fanfare, no epiphany that made it easier. It was pure, raw desperation that forced his hand. The unspoken understanding that continuing as he was would only lead to deeper misery. So, almost mechanically, he followed the strange instructions he had read in the old book.
Sitting on the edge of his worn mattress, feet planted firmly on the cracked floor, he closed his eyes and whispered words that felt alien on his tongue. "I'm grateful for today.
I'm grateful for the opportunities ahead. I'm grateful for the abundance that is coming." The words tasted hollow at first, dry and forced. His reality screamed back at him. The unpaid bills cluttering his kitchen counter, the eviction notice looming ever closer, the gnawing hunger of empty pockets. Gratitude felt absurd. It felt like lying to himself. A cruel trick, a bandage slapped over a gaping wound. He wanted to stop, wanted to curse the ridiculousness of pretending that gratitude could fill his fridge or erase his debt. But something inside, some faint, stubborn ember, pushed him to continue.
Each morning, he repeated the ritual. Eyes closed, hands resting limply on his knees, voice trembling but steady.
At first, he felt nothing but foolishness. Yet after several days, Ricardo began to notice tiny, almost imperceptible shifts within himself. The heavy, bitter fog that had clouded his mind for so long seemed to thin slightly. The relentless stream of negative thoughts, "You're a failure. You'll never make it," began to falter, if only for a moment. He supplemented the gratitude with visualization, though at the start, it seemed even more ludicrous. Ricardo would sit in the silence and see himself wealthy, not just financially, but emotionally, confident, resilient, strong. He pictured standing tall, wearing clothes that fit well, smiling without the weight of shame pulling at his mouth. He imagined a life where he no longer flinched when the phone rang or panicked at the sight of an envelope. It was difficult. His mind resisted, kicking and screaming, insisting that hope was dangerous, that expecting more would only set him up for deeper disappointment. Still, he pushed forward. Visualization became a sacred few minutes where, no matter how brutal his external circumstances, he could taste another reality. A future not shaped by failure, but by potential. He wasn't erasing his struggles. Those were real, undeniable. But he was giving himself permission, however briefly, to believe in the possibility of something better. During the day, whenever despair gnawed at the edges of his mind, Ricardo repeated simple affirmations he barely believed. "I am worthy of success. I am attracting opportunities. I am capable of rebuilding." He did it not because he was convinced, but because doing nothing had already proven to lead nowhere. The change was not immediate. There were no miracles, no sudden checks in the mail, no overnight rescues. Life on the surface looked almost identical. Bank accounts still barren, eviction threats still looming, job prospects still bleak. But internally, the foundation of something new was being laid. Something invisible, yet vital. Without realizing it, Ricardo was reprogramming the language of his thoughts. Where there had once been only fear, scarcity, and defeat, tiny shoots of faith and resilience began to sprout. He began to catch himself in moments where, previously, he would have spiraled into negativity, and instead, paused, reframed, chose a different perspective. It wasn't natural yet. It wasn't effortless. Every ounce of positivity had to be wrung from him like water from a dry sponge. But each repetition, each affirmation, each visualization was watering seeds hidden beneath the surface of his soul. What Ricardo could not see yet, but what would later become undeniable, was that he was changing at the level where all true change begins, the unseen, intangible realm of belief. He wasn't fixing his external world. He was rebuilding himself from the inside out. Each act of gratitude was a brick. Each visualization was a nail. Each affirmation was a beam, supporting a structure that no amount of external chaos could ultimately tear down. Without knowing it, Ricardo had taken the most powerful and most difficult step of all. He had chosen to believe in a future better than his past. He had decided, against all evidence, that he was not finished. That choice, made quietly and stubbornly, was the beginning of everything. Each morning, as the first pale light crept through the cracked blinds of his small, worn apartment, Ricardo began a new ritual, one born not from certainty but from stubborn hope. With the broken kitchen chair creaking under his weight, he would sit upright, close his eyes, and dive deep into the world he was creating inside his mind. No matter how bleak reality appeared, no matter how loudly doubt hammered at the doors of his spirit, Ricardo anchored himself in a new language, a new identity. I am prosperous. I attract opportunities. The words were not mere sounds. They became the heartbeat of his existence. At first, they felt foreign, like trying to wear shoes that didn't fit. But repetition, he learned, had power. Over time, these affirmations no longer sounded like lies. They started to weave themselves into the very fabric of his thoughts. Each declaration was a brick laid carefully in the architecture of a new identity, one grounded not in survival, but in abundance. As the days turned into weeks, Ricardo discovered the subtle art of deliberate imagination. He didn't just say he was prosperous. He saw it. He painted mental portraits richer than any his bank account could currently afford. In vivid, aching detail, he envisioned himself walking into banks where the tellers greeted him by name, conducting business meetings with firm handshakes and confident smiles, traveling without fear of expenses, living without the chains of scarcity tightening around his chest. He could feel the leather of the chair in his future office, hear the clinking of fine glasses at dinners he would host, smell the salt air of vacations he hadn't yet booked. His mind didn't distinguish between fantasy and memory. It simply recorded the experiences he chose to feed it. Slowly, quietly, the life he imagined began to feel less like a dream and more like an inevitability. But Ricardo knew it couldn't stop at thoughts alone. He began replacing old patterns that once anchored him to his lowest self. He caught himself before complaining about his circumstances, a habit that had once flowed effortlessly from his lips. Instead of cursing the thin handful of coins rattling in his pocket, he held them gently, as if they were seeds rather than remnants. He blessed every penny, every minor gain, every small sign of progress. Gratitude for the little he had opened the door for more to flow into his life. Conversations with others shifted, too. Where he once traded in tales of hardship and injustice, he now spoke carefully, choosing words that aligned with the reality he was crafting. Instead of saying, "I'm broke," he would say, "I'm building wealth." Instead of sighing in defeat, he would affirm, "I am preparing for abundance." These were not just linguistic games. They were conscious acts of creation. Discipline began to seep into every corner of his day. He structured his time differently, recognizing that chaos in his schedule mirrored chaos in his mind. Mornings were sacred, reserved for visualization and affirmation. Evenings were for reflection, celebrating victories no matter how microscopic. If he found a forgotten dollar in his jacket, it was a sign of prosperity arriving. If a stranger smiled at him, it was evidence that kindness and opportunity were magnetizing toward him. Over time, Ricardo noticed a profound transformation, not in the world around him, but in the way he moved through that world. Where there had once been fear, there was now cautious optimism. Where anxiety had gripped his decisions, curiosity now nudged him forward. Opportunities he might have once ignored or dismissed as impossible began to catch his attention. He responded to them, even when the voice of fear whispered against it.
Confidence was no longer an act. It was becoming his nature. And it all stemmed from the simplest, most radical decision: to govern his thoughts instead of letting his circumstances dictate them. The real magic wasn't in sudden riches falling from the sky. It was the steady, almost invisible realignment of Ricardo's internal compass. A shift from scarcity to possibility, from helplessness to creative power. Every grateful thought was a magnet pulling unseen blessings closer. Every positive affirmation was a vibration sent into the world, echoing back in opportunities, connections, and unforeseen chances. Without fanfare, without spectacle, Ricardo was stepping into the life he had once only dared to dream of. Not through force, not through luck, but through the quiet, relentless power of mastering his own mind. At first, the shifts were almost imperceptible, like the first, faint stirrings of wind before a storm reshapes the landscape. Life, which for so long had seemed cold, unyielding, and merciless, began to ripple around Ricardo with new possibilities. No explosions, no dramatic, cinematic breakthroughs, just small, delicate changes, like the slow turning of a tide. One morning, scanning local ads more out of habit than hope, Ricardo spotted a position, an opening at a nearby warehouse needing someone for inventory work. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a dream job, but it was honest, steady, and, most importantly, it appeared just as he had started believing he was worthy of stability. Without hesitation, he applied. During the interview, instead of slumping in defeat, Ricardo walked in with quiet strength, speaking with a clarity that surprised even himself. He no longer presented himself as a desperate man begging for a chance. He carried himself as someone who had value to offer. That subtle difference made all the difference. He got the job. The income was modest, but every paycheck felt like a triumph, a validation that the internal work he was doing was leaking into the external world. Each hour he spent stacking shelves, counting inventory, and organizing shipments, Ricardo whispered to himself, "This is the beginning, not the end." Instead of resenting the menial labor, he infused it with gratitude, viewing each task as a brick in the foundation of his new life. Then, something remarkable happened. One evening, browsing through articles on his cracked phone, he stumbled upon a story of individuals starting small businesses online. People just like him, with no wealth, no fancy degrees, no powerful connections, carving out freedom one sale at a time. A spark ignited. Could he do it too? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Yet, instead of immediately dismissing it as impossible, Ricardo allowed himself to entertain the idea. He began researching, spending late nights after work learning everything he could about e-commerce. How to source products, how to create listings, how to market without spending a fortune. There were moments of confusion, moments when the learning curve felt impossibly steep, but Ricardo pressed on with a resolve fueled by the new mindset he had painstakingly built. When the time came to act, Ricardo faced another test, putting real money he barely had, on the line. $10. It might as well have been $1,000. That $10 investment represented groceries, bus fare, survival. Standing over his laptop, fingers trembling, heart pounding in his ears, he clicked "Purchase" on his first batch of inventory. Not with recklessness, but with faith. Faith in himself. Faith in the invisible forces he now trusted were aligning on his behalf. That $10 investment wasn't just about buying products. It was about declaring to the universe, and to himself, that he believed in the life he was creating. He was no longer a man crushed by regret, no longer paralyzed by past mistakes. Ricardo was a man who took risks rooted in hope instead of fear. Days stretched into weeks as he built his tiny online store with painstaking care. He photographed products under the best light he could find. He wrote descriptions with energy and intention. He treated each potential customer not as a sale, but as a relationship. And slowly, life answered back. Orders trickled in, a few dollars here, a few dollars there, but each one felt like thunderous confirmation. He was moving, building, rising. The person who once sat paralyzed on a park bench, drowning in despair, had been replaced by someone else entirely. Not because circumstances had been magically erased, but because Ricardo had been reborn from the inside. He wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. He wasn't hoping the world would change. He had become the change. Every small step, every modest victory, every courageous action layered upon itself, forming a new version of Ricardo, one who trusted his vision more than his fear. Life had not given him miracles.
It had given him something far greater, a mirror reflecting back the energy he chose to project. As he sowed faith, gratitude, and determination, the world responded in kind. Slowly, steadily, relentlessly. And for Ricardo, that steady living conversation between himself and life was the real magic. Every small victory became more than a fleeting moment for Ricardo. It became sacred evidence that the person he was becoming was real. It wasn't about the external achievement itself. It was about what each win whispered to his evolving soul. Each success, no matter how minor, carried a silent message. You are changing. You are worthy. Ricardo understood a profound truth. Transformation was not a single explosion but a relentless series of tiny fires, ignited every day through repetition, celebration, and belief. And so, with every minor triumph, a new customer, a positive review, a dollar earned, he paused, truly paused, and let the gratitude swell within him like a rising tide. He didn't just acknowledge the events. He amplified them. With closed eyes and steady breathing, he absorbed the victories, burning them deep into his subconscious. He was training himself, not to seek validation from the outside world, but to recognize internally that he was now a man aligned with abundance. A man who deserved success because it mirrored his inner worth. He declared, again and again, "I deserve wealth. Abundance is my birthright. Prosperity flows naturally to me." These were not empty affirmations. They were codes, keys turning inside locked doors of his mind that had stayed shut for too long. Every time he reinforced these truths, he was carving a deeper path through the neural networks of his brain, replacing years of conditioning that once screamed scarcity, fear, helplessness. Gratitude became his anchor. Ricardo didn't reserve appreciation for monumental events. He treated every single instance of progress like a sacred ceremony. If a customer bought a $5 item, he celebrated internally as if he had closed a $1 million deal. If a new supplier agreed to work with him, he felt the gratitude as if he had just forged a life-changing alliance. This was deliberate. This was conscious. Ricardo had realized something critical. Life doesn't simply change because you wish it. It changes because you inhabit the identity of the person who already lives the life you seek. And identity is strengthened not in grand moments, but in the quiet, consistent, private victories that nobody else sees. When fear tried to creep in, whispers of, "What if this fails?" Or maybe this was just luck, Ricardo didn't argue with the fear. He overwhelmed it. He drowned it out by reinforcing the reality he chose to believe. With each act of recognition, each moment of sincere gratitude, he fortified the walls of his new mental kingdom. There was a new normal emerging inside him, a steady certainty that abundance wasn't something he had to chase. It was something he naturally attracted by being who he had become. The rituals were simple but potent. He kept a journal where he wrote every win, every unexpected blessing, every moment that made him feel empowered. Not to boast, but to remind himself daily that he was now walking a different path. He made it a practice to speak success over his life in the quiet spaces between actions. While brushing his teeth, walking to work, waiting in line at the store. "I deserve to thrive. Opportunities seek me out effortlessly. Every step I take is blessed." Through repetition, his mind stopped questioning these statements. It began accepting them as facts. Ricardo also learned to celebrate internally without needing external validation. He didn't need applause. He didn't need others to approve or understand. His new identity wasn't built on fragile opinions. It was constructed from an indestructible internal conviction. As this internal foundation grew stronger, the outside world began to mirror his beliefs. More opportunities came. More partnerships emerged. More income flowed. But even as these blessings arrived, Ricardo knew the true reward wasn't what he was gaining materially. It was who he was becoming spiritually. He had stepped beyond the realm of merely hoping for change. He was embodying it. This embodiment wasn't occasional. It wasn't conditional. It was continuous, active, intentional. Morning by morning, night by night, victory by victory, Ricardo rewrote the story etched into his bones. He was no longer reacting to life. He was orchestrating it from the inside out. No victory was too small to celebrate. No blessing was too insignificant to honor. He understood that the universe responds to consistency, to the energy you pour into the world with belief, not desperation. By reinforcing his identity every day, Ricardo wasn't just attracting abundance. He was matching it. His frequency had risen to meet the wealth, the opportunities, the relationships he once thought were beyond his reach. He wasn't the man who once sat broken on a park bench anymore. He was the architect of a new destiny, a destiny shaped, moment by moment, through the relentless, faithful reinforcement of who he chose to be. And with every whispered affirmation, every smile of gratitude, every small victory magnified in his heart, Ricardo's life expanded further, richer, brighter. Because in the end, it wasn't about the words themselves. It was about the unwavering identity behind them. And Ricardo had finally become the man he had once only dared to dream of being. At 40, Ricardo stands as a living testament to the silent, tireless work of inner rebirth. His outer achievements, the flourishing investment portfolio, the thriving assets, the effortless lifestyle of choice, are impressive. Yet, they pale in comparison to the deeper, more sacred victory. He reclaimed himself. The true miracle wasn't the accumulation of wealth. It wasn't the acquisition of properties, stocks, businesses, or partnerships. It wasn't even the ability to travel freely, to wake without financial anxiety, to offer opportunities to others. The real triumph was invisible to the casual observer. Ricardo had meticulously rebuilt the essence of who he was. He forged a new being from the ashes of despair. Piece by piece, belief by belief, he reconstructed a self-image unshakable by circumstance, untouched by external opinion, undefeated by setbacks. The transformation wasn't cosmetic. It penetrated every fiber of his identity. Ricardo no longer lived life reacting to crises. He now navigated from a place of deliberate creation. Decisions once paralyzed by fear were now energized by clarity. Opportunities that once seemed unattainable became natural extensions of his daily existence. Wealth wasn't something he possessed, it was something he embodied. Security, once a distant fantasy, became a silent companion. Freedom, which had once seemed reserved for others, now flowed through his veins. Dignity, stripped away during the darker years, had returned, not as arrogance, but as quiet, unshakable knowing. And yet, perhaps the most astonishing part of his journey was this. Ricardo understood that the money, the investments, the accolades were merely reflections. Mirrors. Echoes of the deeper, invisible revolution that had taken place within. He had shattered the false identities built from failure, criticism, and doubt. He had buried the narrative of unworthiness. He had risen, not just in the financial sense, but in the profoundest human sense, by aligning with his true nature. The person who once questioned his own value now moved through life with serene certainty. The man who once begged the universe for scraps now partnered with life itself, co-creating his reality moment by moment. The soul once caged by shame now soared with quiet power. There was no longer a need to prove anything to anyone. Ricardo's existence, in its simplicity and abundance, spoke volumes without words. He was the proof, the evidence, the living example of what happens when a person chooses, against every external condition, every internal doubt, to become who they were always meant to be. He knew that money could disappear, markets could fluctuate, external successes could shift with time, but the identity he had forged, the deep-rooted, fiercely grounded, infinitely expansive self, could never be taken from him. That was his true wealth. Not the numbers in his bank accounts. Not the assets neatly listed in legal documents. Not the accolades earned or the reputation built. His greatest treasure was invisible, invulnerable, indestructible. The unwavering knowledge of who he was. There was a sacred quietness to his daily life now. Mornings filled with gratitude, not anxiety. Nights spent in peace, not restlessness. He no longer chased fulfillment. He lived inside it. Ricardo had discovered the greatest financial freedom is meaningless without the deeper freedom. The freedom from fear, from self-doubt, from living according to someone else's script. He moved through the world differently now. When he spoke, his words carried a weight born not from effort, but from authenticity. When he made decisions, they were rooted in vision, not desperation. When he encountered challenges, he met them with calm curiosity, not panic. The boy who once thought success was for other people had grown into a man who understood that greatness wasn't about luck, pedigree, or external approval. It was about alignment, about fiercely tending the garden within until it inevitably bore fruit without. Today, as an investor, Ricardo doesn't just invest in companies, stocks, or properties. He invests in people. He invests in dreams. He invests in moments. Because he knows the highest returns are not found in markets. They're found in souls, in choices, in character, in courage. His legacy is not measured by net worth alone. It is measured by the invisible echoes he leaves behind. Lives touched, minds awakened, hearts emboldened to believe again. The boy who sat on a park bench clutching a collection notice no longer exists. In his place stands a man who owns his life, not because of what he has accumulated, but because of what he has become. Ricardo's story is not about rags to riches. It's about brokenness to wholeness, about fear to freedom, about survival to sovereignty, about remembering and reclaiming who you truly are, no matter how far you once strayed. Because true success isn't something you chase. It's something you awaken within yourself. And Ricardo, through grit, gratitude, vision, and relentless inner work, had awakened at last. The greatest discovery Ricardo ever made was invisible to the naked eye. It wasn't a trick, a shortcut, or a hidden market strategy. It wasn't a financial product or a secret networking circle. It was something so profound, so simple, that most people overlook it their entire lives. True wealth is not created externally, it is cultivated internally. This revelation didn't strike him like a lightning bolt. It emerged slowly, like the soft light of dawn creeping over a dark horizon. Through relentless reflection, trial, and inner excavation, Ricardo realized the hard truth he had spent decades avoiding. His biggest burden had never been financial debt. It had been the quiet, crushing debt of his own beliefs. 4 years, without even realizing it, Ricardo had walked through life shackled by invisible chains. Beliefs whispered in childhood, reinforced by failures, fed by society's voices. You're not good enough. You'll always struggle. Success is for other people. You're doomed to repeat the same mistakes. These beliefs had built walls around him stronger than any prison. They colored every decision, sabotaged every opportunity, distorted every possibility. No amount of external effort could overcome what his internal wiring insisted upon. This was the root of poverty. Not an empty wallet, but an impoverished self-concept. The mind, Ricardo came to see, is the original bank account. It is either rich with faith, possibility, courage, or bankrupt with doubt, fear, resignation. External bankruptcy is only the late-stage symptom of internal bankruptcy. Until he changed the balance sheet of his mind, he could never change the balance sheet of his life. Once this clicked into place, everything else began to make sense. He stopped obsessing over how much money he had, and started focusing on how much belief he could hold. He stopped chasing cash and began cultivating certainty. He stopped treating circumstances as causes and began recognizing them as effects. The true currency, Ricardo realized, is mindset. Every thought is a deposit or a withdrawal. Every belief is an investment or an expense. Every word spoken is either compounding interest on abundance or accumulating debt in scarcity. The question shifted from, how do I get rich? To, how do I think richly? The deeper he explored this truth, the more radical his transformation became. He saw clearly that external wealth simply mirrors internal wealth. Money flows where faith lives. Opportunities sprout where self-worth blooms. Resources gather where boldness, gratitude, and generosity are practiced. Ricardo began treating his mind like the most valuable asset he owned. He guarded it fiercely against negativity. He nourished it daily with vision, inspiration, learning. He disciplined it like an athlete training for the most important competition of his life, because, in a very real sense, he was. Mental poverty, the belief in limitation, in lack, in unworthiness, was the true creditor that had kept him enslaved. Once he paid off that internal debt, through forgiveness, through courage, through relentless self-affirmation, financial abundance became the natural byproduct. It wasn't forced. It wasn't manufactured. It simply flowed. He saw now that money is not the origin of wealth. Money is a receipt, proof of value created, proof of mindset aligned, proof of internal worth translated into external action. Trying to get rich without addressing the mind is like trying to collect fruit from a tree whose roots have rotted. It's impossible. Real wealth grows from the inside out. Ricardo began living by an unshakable law. Your outer world will never exceed the boundaries of your inner world. If he wanted more externally, he had to expand internally. If he desired greater freedom, he had to cultivate deeper responsibility. If he sought larger opportunities, he had to embody greater self-trust. The scarcity he once battled wasn't out there, it was inside. And when he dissolved it, reality mirrored back the new blueprint. What stunned him most was how automatic success became once the heavy chains of mental poverty were broken. New ideas came easily. New partnerships felt natural. New ventures unfolded without the desperate, frantic energy he once believed was necessary. He wasn't chasing money anymore. He was simply being himself, and that self was wealthy, expansive, magnetic. Ricardo realized that the universe operates on resonance. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. And when he became abundant internally, abundance found him externally, without struggle, without strain. That was the true secret. Not hustle alone. Not luck. Not inheritance. Not even education in the traditional sense. The secret was claiming, occupying, and fiercely protecting an identity of wealth in thought, in feeling, in expectation. Because the mind is always creating reality, either consciously or unconsciously. Today, Ricardo views wealth differently than most. He doesn't see it as paper or numbers. He sees it as energy, as alignment, as reflection. He knows that losing money cannot strip him of wealth, as long as he maintains his true asset. His mind, his beliefs, his identity. He understands now why so many who win lotteries lose everything within years, and why so many who start with nothing build empires. It is not the money that creates the mindset. It is the mindset that creates, regenerates, and protects the money. Wealth is mental sovereignty. Wealth is emotional discipline. Wealth is spiritual certainty. Once those foundations are built, external riches become inevitable, but no longer necessary to feel whole. Ricardo is free not because he has money. He has money because he became free. This is the lesson few dare to embrace, but the only one that truly matters. There is a quiet power hidden in the most painful places, the moments when it feels like everything has fallen apart, when the ground beneath you has crumbled, when dreams seem buried under rubble. If you are standing at rock bottom right now, understand this: rock bottom is not the end. It is a beginning. A strange, uninvited beginning. A raw, uncomfortable beginning. But a beginning nonetheless. And beginnings hold an invisible kind of magic. At rock bottom, you are stripped of illusions. At rock bottom, the noise of ego fades. At rock bottom, what no longer serves you dies away. At rock bottom, something ancient and powerful awakens inside you. The freedom to rebuild, not with the scraps of old stories, but with new foundations. See, most people view hitting the bottom as a tragedy. They think it marks failure, weakness, defeat. But the truth is far more empowering. Rock bottom is solid ground. Unlike the shifting sands of superficial success, this place, painful as it feels, is real. It is honest. It is a place from which something truly unshakable can rise. The seed of your new life can only be planted in real soil. And where you are now, even if it feels hopeless, is fertile ground. You may not see it yet. That's okay. You may doubt your own ability. That's normal. You may be afraid to try again. That's understandable. But understand this: the greatest transformations never begin from comfort. They begin from discomfort. They begin when the old self can no longer survive, and the new self must be born. Every towering tree was once a seed buried in darkness. Every breathtaking sunrise follows the deepest night. Every magnificent life story includes a chapter of despair. The difference between those who rise and those who stay stuck is not luck. It is not talent. It is not privilege. It is decision. A decision to believe, even when there's no evidence. A decision to move, even when fear screams to stay still. A decision to rewrite the story, even when the past tries to dictate your future. Your life changes the moment your thoughts change. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Not when things get better. Now. Right now. The very thoughts you are nurturing in this moment are shaping your next chapter. Every thought is a brushstroke painting your future. Every belief is a seed germinating the reality you will walk into tomorrow. If you think you are broken, you will live inside that belief. If you think you are resilient, you will embody resilience. If you think you are doomed, you will sabotage every opportunity.
If you think you are destined for greatness, you will find doors where others only see walls. You are the architect of your destiny, not your circumstances, not your critics, not your history. You. And here's the miracle. You do not have to fix everything externally to change your life. You only need to fix the origin point, your mind, your perception, your identity. Change your thoughts, and your world will rearrange itself to match them. This isn't fantasy. This is law. As within, so without. Rock bottom is not an obstacle. It is an altar. It is where you lay down old limitations. It is where you sacrifice outdated narratives. It is where you surrender the smaller version of yourself. And from that sacred surrender, new life springs. You don't need to know how everything will unfold. You don't need a perfect 5-year plan. You don't need certainty about every step. You need only one thing: a willingness to begin. Begin by believing that your future can be different. Begin by speaking to yourself with more kindness. Begin by honoring your small victories. Begin by planting seeds, thoughts of strength, visions of abundance, whispers of possibility, into the soil of today. And trust that what you plant will grow. Not overnight. Not instantly. But inevitably. Growth is the reward for those who dare to nurture hope even when hope feels foolish. Success is the result of those who continue showing up for themselves, even when results are invisible. Transformation belongs to those who decide, again and again, that their story is not over. It all starts within you. Not in a bank account. Not in a title. Not in a relationship. Inside. It starts with a single, defiant, glorious decision. I will not stay buried. I will rise. This is your moment. Not because you have everything figured out, but because you are willing to plant seeds in the soil of uncertainty. You are willing to believe that today's pain can become tomorrow's strength. You are willing to trust that even from rock bottom, you can build a life higher, freer, richer than anything you dared to dream. The only thing standing between you and that life is a decision, a thought, a shift. Choose it. Claim it. Own it. Your new beginning isn't waiting for perfect conditions. It's waiting for you. Start now. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, if you're ready to nurture your new seeds of greatness, stay with us. Subscribe. Connect. Grow. Because your story is still being written. And the best chapters are just beginning. A 5-second message. Are you in debt? Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind.